Okay, Kum learning about tomorrow. Today is Daf Moed Katan Daf Aleph. We're talking about demarcations of Kvarim to avoid koinim stepping there or taras or truma worse to be brought into that area. Says the Gemara. The last thing we learned was the role of Rabbanim, that they have to have the finger in everything. Says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Motza Evan Mitsuyenis. If you found a boulder, a large rock that had this lime on it, the sign, so we're going to assume that Tachter Tameh, somebody was buried beneath that boulder, and but not on the sides, only directly beneath it. Shtayim, you found two rocks next to each other. And obviously, underneath the rocks, we assume that there's a corpse, and to avoid it, the question is, what about in between the rocks? So we say as follows: Im yesh seed beinei, you find that there's also lime on the ground between the two rocks. Then beinei tameh, then it's tameh in between the rocks. In between the rocks, yeah. Now, even though we learned before that when you have a demarcation, it's not underneath demarcation. It's like the demarcation means beyond this point, that's where it begins. But when it comes to an area which is protruding, the whole idea is we're scared that suddenly you'll chance upon it. By the time you realize you're standing in a particular place, you're already standing on the line. So therefore, we said the line is not part of the tumah, it's before it. But when it's raised above the ground, like in a rock, that you'll notice it, then we don't have to add extra land. Directly beneath this lime is where the tumah is. Okay, so that's the logic. So so the question is, what happens between the boulders? So if there's line there on the ground, then that's tummy as well. Then beinei and toir, the rocks and directly beneath them are tummy, but not the area between them. The afal gav, you want to ask a question. Are you telling me, even though the lekach chaydish, you didn't plow through the field? Remember we learned yesterday that if you plow through a field, there was a cave there, but you plowed through it, then you broke everything down, even though you might touch things, but that you could observe from above. But the hovering is not a problem because they're all too small to generate tuna of hovering, of oil. So you're saying to me that even though you didn't plow between the rocks, we can assume it's Torah. But Tanya, didn't we learn in the Brisa saying something else? It says there, Motza Even Achas Mitzuyel. You found one stone that was marked then Tachter Tameh. Stein, you found two stones, and there it says, Im yesh chaydish b'nei. You can see that it was plowed in between. Then we're going to say beinei and toir. Even if there was a corpse there, it's now toir. But being loud. But if not, then beinei and tameh. It seems even though there's no lime over there whatsoever, we're going to assume that's not. If there are two rocks with a mark on it, then we'll assume that even between also somebody was buried. And the reason why they didn't mark it in between is because they didn't have to. They felt the extremities are marked. Obviously, the inside is also marked. So it's a question of what you just said. Says the Gemara of you just said. It says the Gemara, I'm going to pop over here where it says that it's tumbled between the rocks, even though it wasn't plowed. It's talking about Kishahasid Shopoch al Roshayan, that the seed is on top of the rocks, and Umaruda Lekamakans, also on the slope of the rocks, on the sides of the rocks, there's also traces of that line. Therefore, we're going to say as follows. If there's on the side as well, then we ask ourselves what's going on here. So we're going to say, if the area was plowed, then we're going to say that while you were plowing, you moved some of the lime around, and that's why you see stains on the side of the rock as well. But there's nothing on the ground beneath. And that's why that piece is all over the place, it flakes. But if you did not plow, and you have to wonder, you made the line on top of the rock, why is it also on the side of the rock? Then I'm going to say, you know why? Must be this tumah. It's supposed to be an indication that there is a corpse lying between the two rocks as well. That's what it means. So when does this Brisa highlight the fact that it was plowed or not plowed? It's talking about when you found also some lime on the side of the rocks. So if it was plowed in between them, we're going to assume it's tired between the two rocks. And the reason why you have white lime in there is because of the plow itself. It caused these little white pieces to throw around and fly all over the place. Because of the plowing, the equal, you peel some of it off. But the Eloi, but if not, then see the Beinu. Otherwise, you'll say, why is there a line on the side of the rocks? That must be the demarcation for the area in between the rocks, the Tomei, and it is Tomei. That's when we raise the issue of plowing, only if you find it on the side. But Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a case where the lime is on top of the rocks, nothing in between. We're going to assume that it is Torah. Yeah. Says Rabasi says, Meitzar Echad, in those days, the boundary was not just some line that they made around the field. They actually put rocks there, and we see it in America as well, plenty of places, and it elevates, and you elevate it, so that becomes the boundary fence. So it's an elevated boundary. So if you see Meitzar Echad Mitzuyan, you see one side of the field, the boundary, there's a line on it, it has this mark, this identifying mark that there's a cave, then we're going to assume it's only beneath the rocks. Again, we said that because it's raised and it's elevated and it's noticeable, then where the mark is, that's where the tum is. Shnaim, two sides, let's say an L shape. Heim tmein, only the boundaries are tummy. The entire field is tight. Shloisha, in fact, like a U shape, all three sides. Nevertheless, we'll say heim tmein, only beneath these lines is the tummy. The entire field is tight. If on all four sides of the field, even though it's elevated, you see this line, then we'll say that hein tahoidin on the other way around. And then we'll say that on the contrary, this is coming to identify that the entire field is tummy. And then it'll be like any other mark that we said, that underneath it itself is tummy. It's marking off, it's cordoning off an area that the entire area is tummy. And the rest of the field is tummy. Because we learned, ein marchikin siin memokem tumeya. We don't make a mark if we don't want the mark to be too far away from the area that's tummy. So if you have marks on all four sides of the boundary, it must be the entire field is tummy. Okay, it must be the entire field is tummy. Says the Gemara. So we don't want to take away, reduce any land from Eretz Yisrael, accessibility to any parts of Eretz Yisrael if we can help it. Says the Gemara further, we learned in the Mishnah the Yates and Klein. What else they did? They went out to check the fields to see if there's any Klein mixed seeds growing. Are you telling me that Klein is you go out in Chalamoid? Let me ask you a question. We learned not so long ago that in Megillah, the Echad Ba'adar, the first day of Adar, Mashmi and Al Ashkolim, that the first day of Adar is when we read Parsha Shkolim, and that's when they make the announcement of Shkolim, and the 15th day of Adar is when they have the tables all over the place, and then in Yerushalayim on the 25th day of Adar. So it has nothing to do with Cholam Moed. In fact, it's a whole entire month before, month and a half. And then it said, and the Klayim they announced on the 15th day. On the Klein. So it's a month and a half before Pesach. So what are we talking about Cholam Moed? Then there it says also, the 15th day is when they go ahead and they read the Megillah on the walled cities like Yerushalayim. And the Yoitzin, the Kabbat, the Sadrochim, the Sakim, the Chayvah, the God to remove all the weeds from the roads and to fix up all the streets. The Lombard, HaMikvahs, they go and measure all the mikvahs to make sure that there's 40 saw in the mikvahs. But Yoitzin, Kol Tzarchi, they have to take care of all the needs of the public. And we said before that it's coming to teach you how to dig brand new holes if it's for public consumption and necessary. To big reservoirs and cisterns. They would also go out there and mark off the graves. The Yoitzin ala Klein, and they'd go out to do Klein. So what do we see from here? Clearly, that was done on the 15th day of Adar, not the 15th day of Nisan, or it's like 60th, 70th, Chalamoid. Says the Gemara, Rashi already asks, so why are we only asking about Klein? In our Mishnah it says you fix up the roads Chalamoid, and here it says you fix up the roads on the 15th day of Adar. So why are we only asking about Klein? Why aren't we asking about fixing up, repairing the roads? So Rashi said when it comes to repairing the roads, you probably have to do it more than once. So it's quite possible you do it the 15th day of Adar, major works, but then it continues to rain and it causes a bit more damage. So you fix it up, you do the repairs again in the beginning of this, but obviously it's less. And you can do it in Chalamoid, it's a lot less. The rain stopped now, it's a lot less than what we did in Adar. But in Klein, once you pull out the weeds, there's no point to come back again. So that's the question. By roads, there's a point of doing repairs twice, major than minor. But when it comes to Klein, once you move the weeds, it's gone for this crop. So all the the foreign seeds. So why, if you did it in the 15th day of Adar, would you go again on the 15th day of Nisan and check for climb? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yisrael, they have two answers. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yisrael. Chadam, one of them says, "Kan be'vochi, kan be'afir." You're right. We check climb twice. Then one of them is for those that sort of grow early on, and not everything grows at the same time. So those plants that grow early, we can check the 50-day Adar. Those that are late bloomers, we can only check in Nisan, because you cannot really tell until it starts growing to see that there's things growing differently. And so those come early, those come late. It's like the end of Parshas Shmos when we talk Ve'eda. We're talking about the different grains. Those are early and those are late. The Chadam, and the other one says kan bezroim and kan birakas. When it comes to grains, then we look at the 50-day Adar. When it comes to vegetables, they generally grow later. That's where we go on this. So there's a need to go for both. We're looking for two different things. When do we say that you don't go out before Adar at all? It's either 15th day of Adar or Chalamoid is She'ein. You cannot recognize any of them, of the seeds growing or the plants growing. Aval Nitzen Nika, if you can tell already by the blossoming, and you can tell whether it's foreign seeds or not, Yaitzin Alein, you go out even earlier. So you want to find. So Maishna b'cholosh Moed Nafkinan. Why dafka chalamoid? To go out before Pesach, go out after Pesach. Why dafka do we go on chalamoid? It's a very interesting answer the Gemara gives here. Why dafka chalamoid? You know why? Because that's the cheapest time for labor. Why is that the cheapest time for labor? Because nobody's working chalamoid generally. So there's a lot of people out there looking for a job. And therefore, if you're going to go out, you can tender it and get people to be prepared to take a discount, a cut on their pay, so they can get some employment. So and why is that important? Wages then are much cheaper than throughout the year, because there's plenty of work around and most people don't work. So what do we learn from here? The fact that, in other words, we are going out of our way to make sure that we can hire these employees to go check people's fields, these supervisors, to check whether there's climb or not. We want to pay a wage as little as possible. And why is that? Because where are they getting the money from? This is tzedakah money. This is the money that people donate. And when you're dealing with mom and tzibur, tzedakah money, you have to be stingy in every penny. You have to calculate every penny. And therefore, if you have a choice of paying wages X or paying wages Y and getting the exact same result, then you have an obligation to try to pay the lower wage. And that's why we delay till Chalamoid. What an interesting philosophy here, that Klolos money or Tzibur money, you have to be much more careful and spend it much more wisely and be sort of a spendthrift. Good, and more than that, who's actually paying the wages of all of these supervisors? Not the owner of farms, but the government, the Hektish is paying it, and therefore it's tzedakah money. Because these are not because if it's not tzedakah money, but actually each farmer, we make a tax, a levy, and each farmer has to pay for the supervisor that comes to visit. The mine of Kolaminai, what do we care if it costs them more money? It's not our problem; it's their problem. Whatever they have to pay, they have to pay. It's our concern how much it costs them, the government. Why are we encouraging them to go chalamoid so they can save some money? It's not our place to go ahead and worry about people's finances. That's not our job. Must be because it's communal money. If it's communal money, it's our achray is to try to find always to get the best outcome and spend the least amount of money, which is a very interesting philosophy when it comes to how to deal with communal money and communal coffers. And people shouldn't be profligate with public money, which is the other way around. Okay, when we say that if you find climb, you have to get rid of it, uproot it. What's the ratio? I mean, you always might find the wind can blow a couple of seeds into a farm, that you get to uproot the entire farm. How much? What's considered climb? This is how Rashi does. Not everybody agrees. Kol saw, every measure of a saw. If in the area of a saw, 50 am by 50 am, you have a number of seeds equal to a quarter of a kav, then you have to then reduce it. But what happens? You have to remove it all. What happens if you have less than a quarter of a kav? you can leave it there intact. Says the Gemara, and now, according to Rashi, if you find more than a quarter of a kav, then all you have to do is bring it down to less than a quarter of a kav. Other Rishonim hold if you found more than a quarter of a kav of foreign seeds, then you have to remove the entire crop, the entire foreign seeds, not just bring it down, reduce it to less than a quarter of a kav. You have to remove them all. So the Gemara about Tanya, but didn't we learn elsewhere? They made a takana. They find that your field is infested with climb. They don't just go ahead and pull out the weeds. They ban your entire field, and they say that this field now is ownerless. Anybody can come and take whatever they want. So which one is it? Like kasha. So it's interesting what happened there. Look how it evolved. Before they instituted some new regulations, this is post that. What happened? The time we learned, but it's showing in the beginning, everybody was very honest. So the Bezdin would send out these supervisors. They would go in the field, they noticed some climb. They thought the guy, there's naivety, thought it's permitted, whatever it is. So they went along and they pulled out, they weeded. It's like weeds because these don't belong in this particular field. They pulled out those alien seeds. And what they do with them? They gave it back to the owner and said, hey, feed this to your animal as fodder. The owners of farms are mamish overjoyed for two reasons. First of all, you took out our weeds because these foreign seeds are like weeds to this crop, number one. And number two, you just gave us food for our animals and it cost us nothing. And the second thing is that now we have fodder for our animals and it costs us nothing because we don't pay you supervisors. The Hegdish pays you. They saw people starting to take advantage. That they didn't bother fixing up their own field. They were waiting for the supervisor to do all the work for them. So they made a takana. So the next step that evolved was they would weed out all of these foreign seeds, but didn't give it to your animal. But what they did with it was they would toss it out in the street and say anybody can come and take it. But the owners still very happy, the owners of the farms, but at least you went through our whole farm, inch by inch, and you took out all the foreign, all the weeds. Shemenach, instead of saying machaya. And if I would have to hire help, it would cost me a fortune. Here, the Hegdish is paying you, communal kafas are paying you, it costs us nothing. The Chacham realized how people were exploiting the situation. The next step was we punish you, we penalize you. You're relying on us. It's one thing you have less than a quarter of a kav. But if it's more than a quarter of a kav, it would have been noticeable. So you're just taking advantage. You want us to do all the work for you. If you do that, we're going to penalize you, and your entire field becomes hefker. We'll post guards there, and everybody can come in and take whatever they want. So that's what happened. Talking about it further. So in the first Mishnah, we learned the first Mishnah holds that a soda base, a shlach in a field that's very thirsty, that needs irrigated water. So then we make special dispensation of chalamoid, and as long as you're preventing a loss. And it's not excessive bother. That was the view of the first Mishnah. Now we're going to have a little bit of an argument, and see the first Mishnah is like Rabbi Ben Yaakov away. Rabbi Ben Yaakov, in fact, we learned how the whole discussion in the beginning who the author of our Mishnah. If you have this base, if you have, let's say, a field, even a base habal, the way some Rishonim learn, even a base habal, which means that rainwater is adequate. But if you have, let's say, excess water next to one tree, you're allowed to then divert it. What you're doing is, you're taking your foot and making a little ridge in the ground, diverting some of the water from one tree to the next tree. So even though you're not really preventing loss here at all, but there's really no bother at all. But what's the big bother? All you're doing is putting your foot in the ground and, making a little groove, and the water flows on its own. Provided you don't then do this and make sure that the entire field is watered. Because if you water the entire field, then since it's a dehabal, there's no loss whatsoever, and it requires more effort. I'll do that. This is the next case. Let's say you have plants, grains. You didn't bother irrigating it before chalamoid. You should not go ahead and irrigate it on chalamoid. Big machlekes from how to learn. Rashi learns that since you didn't water it before chalamoid, that means it could grow without water. So another 8 days is not going to ruin it. So therefore, it's not really preventing a loss, and it's just you want to be better and more fertile, more profitable. That you're not allowed to do, according to the first opinion, which is like our first Mishnah. Others that I'm learning just the opposite. That if you didn't give it to drink, it definitely needs a lot of water, and a lot of water is a very big bother, and a very big bother. You're not allowed to do chalamoid. And the Chachamim Matirim Bezev, the Chacham disagree. They hold like Rameya that says that even if it's not a loss, even if it's just a profit, you're allowed to do that on Chalamoid. And therefore they say you're allowed to water the entire field, not just from one tree to another tree. And they said that even though you didn't water it before, didn't irrigate it before Chalamoid, you're allowed to do Chalamoid. So the third opinion of Shani that says the pshat over here is that it needed water before Chalamoid, but you couldn't be bothered. In other words, you're relying on Chalamoid when you have some more free time. If you should have done it before Chalamoid and you didn't do it before Chalamoid, we're not going to let you do it on Chalamoid. According to Blazman Yaakov. Says the Gemara, this is Blazman Yaakov saying you're not allowed to water the entire field. But im hoisa sodom metunenes, let's say if the field itself was very, very moist and now is drying up, then if there's a loss about to happen, then you're allowed to water the entire field. Even if it's, let's say, it's on the base of Baal, generally rainwater is sufficient. But because it used to be very wet and now it's dry, it means it needs desperately some water now. It's not raining right now, so then you're allowed to. So it's an excessive loss. When we say you're not allowed to pass, what do you call it? Irrigate the entire field. We're talking about if you didn't have anything to drink before Chalamoid. But if, let's say, you did irrigate it before Chalamoid, so then then you're allowed to continue doing it in Chalamoid because it needs water. So then to prevent a loss. This is the part that we're trying to bring out. And if it was a wet field, moist field, now it's dry, mutter you're allowed to prevent a loss. The aim mashkin sodeh gori. But if, let's say, a field that's really dry, and that's how generally it is, you're not allowed to irrigate it b'moed chalamoid, because it's not really preventing a loss. Because anyway, it's always like sort of a dry field. And the Chachamim amate bezev, the Chachamim permitted all along, and because they say even if it's not a loss, preventing a loss, it's just merely a profit, you're allowed to do that on Chalamoid. So Blazman Yaakov here is like the author is like our first Mishnah we had. We learned from here, according to the rabbis, to this garden, you're allowed to pour water all over it, even if you don't do it, there's no loss. But remember, the Chacham holds we don't need a loss, even if it's just profitable, it's also right. So the Gorim, this was Chalamoid. It's why. So the Gorim, a field that's generally dry. What do you call it? So the Gorim, a field that's generally dry. My time, why is it that you're allowed to? Because if you add water to it, you're not preventing a loss, but you make it a bit more profitable. Those crops that generally are delayed, that will grow later, you just brought it forward because you added some more water, right? And yet you're allowed to, according to Chachamim. So sitting over here, when it comes to a garden, if you water it, you're going to bring forward that things will grow earlier. And according to Chachamim, you're allowed to do that. It's good enough. It's good enough. Yeah. Now, the tarbitz is different than mashke. Mashke means you put a lot of water, and tarbitz means putting a little bit of water. Tell them what we learned. Marbitzin, you're allowed to put water, a little bit of water. Stay love on a field of grain. B'shvi, it's in the year of Shemitah, of a leibemay, not a chalamoid. We're talking about over here a field which generally sustains itself on rainwater. It doesn't really need irrigated water. So therefore, you're not allowed to do a chalamoid because, again, you're not preventing any loss. It's enough, sufficient, the rainwater. You just want it to grow better, that you're not allowed to. But Tanya, we learned elsewhere, Marbitz, you are permitted to do it. Bein b'moed, bein b'shvius. You're allowed to do a chalamoid, you're allowed to water, even though it's a meal profitable, not a question of preventing a loss. Rabbi Blazman Yaakov says you need a loss to prevent a loss, which is like our first Mishnah. If you're not doing a chalamoid, and the other was Rabban hold that even if it's just a question of profit, it's also permitted. Tani Ida, we learned elsewhere. My beats in study 11 Shvi is you're allowed to go ahead and pour water on this field of grains right before Shemitah. Kadesh Yetsu Yerakas B'Shvi is in order that things should grow in the year Shemitah. But when you're doing it in the 6th year, Not only that, in other words, you're not allowed to water in the year of Shemitah itself to grow Shemitah, because then you're working with the Shemitah, but you're watering it prior to Shemitah, then you're allowed to. Not only that, you're allowed to water Shemitah, not that you want it to grow in the year of Shemitah. I guess it's talking about now towards the end of the Shemitah year, you want it to grow in the 8th year. You can do that, or you lose a little bit of water, you could do that. Mishnah. Sodin, but continuing to talk the laws of Chalamoid, Sodin as Asians, you're allowed to capture this particular animal called Asia. What in the world is this animal called Asia? The Gemara will talk about it in a minute. So the Mishnah says that you're allowed to capture the issues because it's destroying your field, and therefore you're allowed to capture it to avoid any more destruction. And field mice, Mizdei Ilan from a field of trees, and Mizdei Lovan from a field of crop, from grains. Kedarka, the normal way of trapping these animals, what you're doing is you're preventing a loss. The Moed, whether it's Chalamoid or Shri near Shemitah. Why it should be a problem in Shemitah? Because what you do is, we'll see more later, you dig a hole, and that's how you trap them. But remember, digging a hole, you're not allowed to dig holes because chodesh, plowing. And if you're digging a hole, it looks like you're being chodesh. But in this instance, you're allowed to prevent a loss. However, Chachamim are a bit more bach. Chachamim say, when it comes to a tree or fields, the mice are much more threatening and cause so much more havoc. Then Kedarkai, go ahead and do whatever you have to do to trap them. When it comes to a field, a grain field, the field mice don't really cause that much damage. Then Shalai Kedarkai, you have to trap them, but not the normal way. And because it's not really avoiding a hefsed, make a shini. Another thing is, let's say part of if there's a breach in your wall, you're allowed to go ahead and make repairs. But a Shemitah, and when it comes to Shemitah, not only are you allowed to make repairs in a breach, but you're allowed to build a wall in the first instance. Why? Because you want to make sure that your field is protected. People don't trample on your field and so on. Says the Gemara, first of all, my ishus. What kind of animal is ishus? I'm going to read a beria she'ein lo nai, a creature that has no eyes. So according to Rabbi Tanura, we're talking about a bat here or kind of an owl. According to Rashi says it's an animal with no eyes, and Rashi says v'chofer bekarka, it digs in the ground. So we're talking about something like a weasel or a mole that has no eyes. We're not talking about a flying creature. Amar Bar Shmuel v'tem Rabbi Shammai Mikra. Where do you find this word ishus? That ishus means that you can't see. It says the pasuk, "K'may shablul temes yalei." So just like this little creature that crawls on the ground, and it comes out of its shell, and it sort of fades away and it decomposes and everything else. Is nefel ishus. So the ishus will fall bal chodeshem without even ever seeing the sun. So we're talking about the ishus as some kind of a creature that what do you call it? That has no eyes, doesn't see anything. And the Rambam is saying that's what should happen to all the Rishonim. So we see ishus is this animal with no eyes. Says the Gemara further. That's what we learned. Sodin, that's the ishus of our body. You're allowed to trap this ishus, this bat or this mole. That's our body when filled by they have love and they are ilan kedak. You're allowed to trap them the normal way. This is what this is the first opinion on Mishnah. Then it says here in the Brayset, you can destroy a chalamoid. You have ant hills, you can destroy an ant hill. So kates and machrivin. How do you destroy an ant hill without the ants coming right back? Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, a very interesting thing. Maybe offer you bring sand, you find another ant hill. You bring sand from that other anthill and you mix it with this anthill over here. Some say with ants on it as well. Some say even without the ants, just the sand. And what happens is there's a struggle, there's a war. As we know, we read that ants are considered the strongest animal in the world because they can pick up things greater than their weight. And in Choinkin there's a struggle, and what do you call it? And they strangle each other. So some of us will say because the other ants will struggle, with territorial. What Rashi seems to be saying is not so much there are other ants, it's just the sand, and because they don't recognize the smell, they smell the sand, and they don't recognize it, so self-strangulate, or they I guess revolt against each other. You have to make sure that the other ant hill, these ants here don't recognize before there'll be a struggle. So it has to come from the other side of the river because then there's no scent that can travel that far. And it's much more than just the other side of the river. With the Leka Gisha, there's no bridge because otherwise ants continue walking. Could very well be some of the ants here travel to the other side. So they recognize that scent and therefore there won't be a struggle. And Vahuda Leka Gamla, not only there's no real bridge, there's not even a board that you can cross over. And not only that, there's not even a very narrow bridge, and you have to hold on to the rope to be able to cross across it. And because if there was any of those, then the ants can just walk back and forth, and they will recognize the scent, and there won't be a struggle here. You have to make sure that the ants on your side have absolutely never smelled the sand on the other side. And ad kama, how far away does it have to be on the other side of the river before we can say that the ants don't have any sense of it? Is ad parsa, minimum distance of a parsa. It's amazing. If there's a river and there's no bridge, if it's less than 4 kilometers away, the ants have this unbelievable scent that they can recognize the sand. Or maybe the sand in this existing locale are all very similar. You have to have sand from a different locale, and a different locale means a parsa away, where the ants then don't recognize it, and therefore they are confused, and the struggle begins. Okay, we'll stop over here, and we'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem.